Oh, hey there. Bet you want to learn how to use this. I guess it's a perfect time to show you. So this is a carbide cutoff saw. We call this the Evo. And I'm going to use it to chop this piece of steel right here. All right, so let's talk a little bit about this machine. So this is a carbide saw, and as you just saw, it doesn't throw a ton of sparks. It does throw off these little metal chips here. You can see them, they're pretty tiny, they get pretty sharp. And it does a really nice job of cutting materials, and it can leave a little burr or an edge on there. So we're just gonna kind of take a look at how you load this, how you use it safely, and then I have a little quiz for you to take. This is great because it leaves really clean straight cuts, and you can dial those in to set really accurate angles for when you're fabricating or building a project. So I'm going to load a few different kinds of material in here. I'll just walk you through those one at a time so you can see what it can do, and then I'll show you how to turn those angles around. The first thing you need to know is what you have to do to protect yourself with this machine. There's anything you can put on your hands that will protect you from that blade. It's that simple. Your gloves will not protect you from this blade. So awareness will protect you from that portion. We have a guard. It's right here. You got to make sure it's operating. When you pull down on the handle, the guard should retract back. These saws do have a habit of kind of sticking, that guard sticks. It doesn't stick up though, it sticks down. So what you'll notice when you try to pull this down, it'll be stuck. You just give it a little rotation like this to get it started, it will go. This saw works fine, but you will notice out in the industry that does tend to kind of happen once in a while. We have here the clamping mechanism, and this is for, if you rock this up, it's for allowing this to pull back quickly, which it doesn't seem to be doing right now. A little hung up. There it goes. Probably has a chip in there or something. This is the other side of the clamping face. It adjusts right here so that you can turn this back and forth. There's a tool here for making changes to any of the pieces that you actually have to move, or changing the blade out. If it's a thing that doesn't have a handle on it, it turns up and down this way. And there's a button here that you have to push in to get the trigger to apply. There's also a lock down here, and what that does, if you turn it like this, when you pull the head down, it will lock itself into place and it will keep it down. We store it like this when we put it away for the day or for transporting it somewhere, so that it's not so bulky and hingy, because you could get your fingers pinched in any of those things. And back here, there's a little tray you can pull out to get all of the little, it's like sawdust, but the metal version of that. So there's these little sharp, tiny chips. Of course, you're gonna need to wear your eye protection. And I have the Z87 lenses installed in these for that. And you need to use some hearing protection. These do a pretty good job for me, and I'm using them right now to record. So they're already in there, but we have earmuffs and also earplugs. And if you watch the intro video, you can see where those are stored in the shop. I do wear gloves though still when I'm using this, because a lot of the edges of the metal when you're done are sharp, leave what's called a burr. And just when you're in the shop, it's a good idea to handle metal with gloves on and everything, just so you don't pinch your fingers. Okay, so we're gonna load and trim some materials in here first, and I'll just walk you through that process. The first material that we're gonna use is right here. It's called box tubing, or rec tube, short for rectangle. Box tubing is square like this. I'm gonna set it in there. The blade is gonna come down to cut here. So what you do is you'll load your material in and slide it back and forth until the blade lines up with your line. If you're used to, this blade's getting pretty tired, I have a brand new one to put in here before everybody gets back. If you're familiar with any kind of wood equipment, it basically cuts the same way. You just got to go slower, so you don't want to slam this thing down into the material, because you'll definitely chip it. So with square materials, we don't have to worry about them rotating or doing anything. We just make sure that it's on there tight, pull it down, pull the trigger. We're gonna work our way through it. Here we go. It's gonna be loud. like I said, this is kind of dull, so the material is going to come off here a little hotter, and there's going to be more of a burr on it. This is the burr right here. This is the sharpest piece. You're going to want to take this to the sander and kind of sand that or clean it off, or take a file to it in the meantime. That's why you're wearing gloves, is to protect you from that right there. Okay, so I'm going to unload this. To do that, I'm going to loosen the handle this direction, and then I can pull the material out. I'll get this out of the way. You probably noticed how loud that is. It's probably one of the loudest pieces of equipment that we have here. And you're gonna need to protect yourself and others, so we take this outside to do as much cutting as possible, unless we're working on something in the shop where we can protect everybody's ears. We take it outside. We let people know so that they can cover. All right, and then since sparks, these shards do fly out of here, it's something to take care of. Now when you're cutting angle iron off straight, this is angle iron. The angle is in here. Some people call it L iron, that's actually a little different. Anyway, angle iron, you put it down like a tent or a rooftop like this to cut it, and you cut through. If you're making straight cuts. If you're making angled cuts, it doesn't work like that, and I'll show you next how to do that and make sure that it stays in there safely. So we're gonna snug this down. I like to keep my hand right here as I cut. Oh, I can feel if it's doing any rotating or trying to catch. That's an important thing to know. Okay, so let's put something round in here. Round things are the most difficult to cut and also the easiest to cut. Now that sounds kind of goofy, but here's why they're the most difficult. They like to kind of spin, and that's not good because it chips the teeth off the blade, which is why this one's pretty tired now. So it's one of the hardest ones to lock down. It's also hard to determine your location this way. If you're making an angled cut, you have to be very sure that you mark your materials so that you have them turned correctly when you try to make your cuts. So I'm just gonna cut this off, really simple. Straight cuts, they're not that bad. The main deal is keeping your hand here so you know that it's rotating. If it is rotating, you can always just back the saw up and out, no big deal. And then make sure it's secured down and tighten it. Typically you can control it by just holding on to the piece. And the longer the piece is, the more weight it has, less likely it's gonna move around, but that's still an important thing. And I like to make sure that it's in there by kind of reefing it up and down like this. It'll jiggle around a little bit, but hopefully it's sat down all the way. And it looks like it's gonna make a nice straight cut. We'll go ahead and do that. So cutting bar, if you're gonna cut bar, or what we affectionately call strap, when it's really thin like this one direction and wide the other, a lot of times we're gonna call that strapping, but bar is a perfectly acceptable term. We cut it like this. If you turn it this way, it will work, but you're trying to cut through a lot at the same time. They tend to get really hot, it's tougher on the blade, it's tougher on the motor, everything, rather than going through like this where only one tooth's hitting it at a time. It takes away the material fairly fast, no big deal. Anyway, I'll put that in there. And we'll go ahead and give it a little cut. And obviously, if you need to make the cut on an angle, you're gonna have to lay it down and turn it. So most of what you're gonna do is something like this. Most of the time we'll chop our bar in the hydraulic shear. So you turn it like this and we'll chop it like that. That's in a different video. You may have seen that one already, or depending on which order you're watching these in, or maybe not. Okay, so every now and then you have to cut something a little funky, like maybe an angle on one of these or something. So I'm gonna demonstrate how to do that. Keep it pretty simple. If I get distracted and run away really fast, it's because the wasps are attacking me out here. Since I'm the only one here, it's not really worth killing them all right now because they will just come right back. Okay, so this lever right here is turned, and you may have to pull up on it and that will free the mechanism so you can start your rotation over again. It'll click down, turn it, and then this will move back and forth for making a cut. So I'm gonna tighten this back down. And I'm gonna pull this back. This is where this really comes in handy. I'm gonna set it down. So if I need to make a cut in this, let's say I'm gonna go around the edge of a box, like a picture frame, then I need to make a cut going this direction. In order to do that, keep it in here safely, I have to have some way of catching this so that it doesn't move. And that's where pieces like this come in, because you can drop this in here to help pinch that piece of material. And you're gonna wanna make sure that it gets in there good and tight so that it doesn't move around. So a piece of tubing is a great thing to hold it in there. Typically, a little more is a little better. So the way to do that is taking a longer piece like this. We have lots of scrap and stuff like that around, and you can drop in there to help hold the material down, and you'll be able to make your cut. You just want to make sure that it is a little bigger than this distance here so that it actually pushes against this piece and then sandwiches the piece that you need to cut in there. It's just like a filler block. It's just kind of filling the spot in there. Now, if you over tighten this, sometimes it will move out of the way. That's not necessarily a good thing either. So let's go ahead and cut this. It feels like it's nice and stable, pretty sturdy. I'm gonna hold it back here to make sure that it's good. That's a little better. Okay, here we go. You'll notice how sharp that is too. Obviously, we're gonna wanna clean it up. And most of the time, if you're gonna be putting two things together like this, you're gonna be welding. You want a little bit of room to put some weld in there anyway. So just kind of flattening that off with a grinder is a really good idea. I should have put the other glove on there. Probably noticed I didn't. There's a wasp flying around it right now. We're gonna kind of shake it out. Farm hazards. I check these for spiders too if they've been sitting for a long time, so it's something to think about. Okay, so this is a really good time to share with you some layout and some layout tools. And the reason why is this saw is really good for doing miter cuts, which is a way of bringing two pieces together so that they fit like a picture frame. And these are probably the two tools you're gonna use the absolute most. We're gonna use these for putting together our piece or drawing our piece. Then we can also use them or some other adaptations that I'll show you to get the measurement correctly on the saw so that it does what we want to do. So I'm going to start with something super simple, and it's a 45-degree miter cut, which basically means that you have a piece that's going to come in like this, and then a piece that's going to come in like that, and they'll have a joint right between them. Since this is 90 degrees, that joint's going to be 45. I'm using soapstone to lay this out. I keep big boxes of this in the shop. When you have to draw something that's really detailed, you're gonna wanna grind these down so that they make a nice clean edge. And you could do that by just rubbing them on the ground. And this is what I mean by a nice clean edge. You can rub them down. See how it has that nice bevel on there? You could put this right up against your tool and draw a real straight, nice line. On concrete, that's not as much of a thing. So here's our 90 degree, and if we're gonna cut two pieces, you have to have a 45 in between them right there to be able to make a proper cut. So there's a lot of ways of making that 45-degree line. This is one of the ways of doing that. So I could just take this over to my saw, set it for 45 degrees, and we'd be good to go to cut. You can also do layouts on the actual ground if you're trying to sketch out what things look like. And this is all well and good if it's a 90-degree angle, because it's very, very simple. That's a 45 right here. That's a 90, and half of 90 is 45. It's very, very simple. Okay, so if we wanted to cut a piece of angle iron, to match this, we have to put this angle into the saw. You could see that this isn't quite the right angle there. That's not what we actually need. That's a little bit straighter than 90. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go dial the saw in for this 45-degree angle so that we can make two joints that come together. So let's go ahead and head up there and make that adjustment. And I'm gonna show you how to measure these angles when you don't have specialized tools. Because in real life, sometimes you need to replace something or you're building something and you might not be able to measure that angle with a tool because you can't get up in there or whatever. I'm gonna show you a little trick for that. So it's to be able to set these angles or set multiple angles if you need to do multiple pieces. All right, here we go. Okay, so you saw the adjustment lever earlier that you can turn to loosen this up. So we're gonna start by doing that and making sure that we can move this back and forth. There's a little degree marker up here, so if you know the degrees of your cut, you can just use that. But they're not always accurate, so I tell people just use them as a reference to get close and then to actually measure them in with something in real life to make sure that it's correct. Because the numbers on there are theoretically correct, but something you're gonna hear me say a lot, that in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice, actually doing something. But in practice, there really is. So in practice, we want to make sure that this is really a 45-degree angle. The best way to do that is to measure off of the blade and then set this rear vise jaw. So I'm pulling down the blade, and what I'm gonna do is make sure that your saw is unplugged because you get your hands in here. And I'm gonna set this along the blade edge when I pull it down, like this. And then I'm gonna go to the other side and make sure that that's adjusted correctly so that it's actually sitting at 45. So when I load my material in there, it cuts the cut that I want. All right, I'll tighten it down in place. Here's my 45-degree cut right here. And I'm gonna go ahead and grab my material and I'll make my first cut. And then we're gonna have to flip the material over, clamp it, and make the opposite cut. And those two should come together to a 90. Okay, so I loaded this in here exactly the way you saw before. I'm using this bar to hold it in there. And I'm lined up, you can see how far from 45 that last cut was. So I'm gonna go ahead and make that cut right now. And if you're cutting tubings, it's great because the piece that falls off, you just flip it over and you can join it together and you'll have your compound miter. However, this doesn't work for angle iron because the side that comes off of this will be backwards and they won't join together. I'll show you that in a sec. Wow, look at that. You see how much it moved? Guess I didn't do a good job tightening that down. We're gonna have to reset that and check it again. There we go, a little bit tighter. I wonder if that happens in real life. All the time. The trick is to quit cutting before it gets bad. All right, so we have our cut right there. And so remember I told you I would show you how you can't just join these together. So this is the direction it came off. So we need to cut the opposite one that goes this way. Well, we can't just flip this one over and stick it in that place to make the 90. And the reason why is it's upside down, right? So the piece that drops off of this almost always has to be a recut. With tubings, it's not that way. Okay, so we're gonna make a second cut to make the 90 for the other side. Okay, so let me show you the loading for the cut on the other side. So this one's gonna have to get cut on an angle like this. If we cut it this way, it wouldn't help us too much because the wrong piece would be sticking out. It would look like this. So what we have to do is put the blocking underneath this time. I'm gonna be careful not to leave my blocking sticking out here. Okay, so this is blocked up, ready to go, tight. If you tighten it too awful much, it will start moving this and you can get some funky angles. So if you're having a hard time getting it to hold down, you can put a clamp back here if necessary to kind of help hold it. Or you can try to control it to some degree, but if it's trying to creep in, it can do weird things to the blade, which is why this one's in the shape it's in. Okay, so these two pieces have now been removed off of there. And we have a 45 on this side. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take those two 45s and put them together. Okay, so here we are. We're over at the disc sander here, and our disc sander spins this direction. That's an important thing to know. And I'm just gonna clean off these joints before we go put them together. But what we want to do is just talk about how to use this machine. It's pretty simple and it works really fast. And it's really good for taking off these really sharp spots here. So you can wear gloves with this machine, that's fine. But since it's spinning this way, if you put material over here, it will kick up funny, and that's not good. If you put really thin stuff here, it can grab it, pull it in. So you don't want to have your fingers on top there so that it can grab it and pull it in. You want to hold your fingers way back or off to the side. So if something flips out of your hands, it'll suck the metal through. Worst case scenario is it's going to fly around and come out this way, so that you're not standing there because you're going to be over here on this side. So the on switch is over here on the side. It spins forever. So if you turn it off, it may be spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning. That's not necessarily because it's on still. It's because the bearings in here are really smooth and it goes for a long time. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and turn it on and do a little grinding. And our goal is just take this metal burr sharp spot off the edge there. And when I'm getting ready to weld something, if I'm gonna weld this all the way around, I might put a little edge on this, little bevel to help sink it down and help that weld to stick in there for penetration. I might not. And then another thing I kind of classically do is if I'm putting two joints together, I may not make it exactly 45. I may change it just a little bit. And the reason why is if I want to put a weld down this backside here on the outside, I like to leave just a little gap so I have a place to drop it down there. And then I will clamp this in place straight and I will start a burn here. I'll burn down the top. And as the weld gets hotter, as it goes along, it will seal and cut deeper into that piece of metal. And then I can do a quick bead down this side here and fill it in. It'll be nice and even that way. And it just kind of depends on the job that you're doing or where you're welding. If you're welding on the inside, then you don't have to do that. But it still can help. Depends on how much room you need. So I'm gonna turn this on, I think. Pretty fast. Just takes a little edge off of it right there. Okay. And of course you could use your angle grinder for the same thing or a file or whatever, but this is so fast, it works great. The things it doesn't do well is get on the insides here. So please don't try to just get into the machine to find a way to make that work and then end up over here and have it catching and throwing sparks up into the air. That's not what we're about. So I'll tell you one more thing about this grinder. We don't put stuff in here that isn't steel. And the reason why is it clogs up the discs. And if we start grinding other things like plastic or wood, it makes a flammability issue here in the shop. So we only use steel in this. If you use aluminum or some of the other materials that are not steel or iron, they can pack into the blade or into the grinder disc and it will get really, really, really hot. And the sandpaper will start flying apart in there. And it won't do its job well. It'll also make your metal really, really hot. So same rules are for disc grinders. We don't use those on things that aren't steel either or iron. So if a magnet sticks to it, you're probably fine. If you're not sure, just come ask. And this is the safe zone right here between there and there that you can use to grind. The rest of this disc up here off limits, this side off limits. If it were spinning this direction, then this side is the side you'd use and that side would be off limits. All right? Okay, and so, here's our That's remarkably hard to do while holding a camera and looking at it. So there's your 90 degree. All right, so you're probably thinking, hey Hess, that's all well and good if it's a 90 degree angle, because I already know to divide 90 in half to get 45. But what if it's something else? And you know, how do I do that? So I have this set up. So let's imagine what we'd use this for. Let's say this was part of a bar for the back of a truck, like a headache rack or something that goes up against the cab to protect it or whatever. So we want to cut a piece of tubing that goes around like this. Well, this angle and that angle aren't the same. So now we're going to have to set the saw twice. How do we do that? How do we measure that angle? And this reminds me of a time I talked to my shop teacher back in the day. He said something to me. He goes, Barrett, math isn't all about numbers. And I thought, well, no, you're wrong. Like, math is almost 100% all about numbers. And he said, no, we use math to describe things that actually happen in real life a lot of the time. So he goes, you don't have to know what that number is. You just need to know what the angle is and then what half the angle is. You don't actually need numbers for that. And so I learned this a long time ago from him. Thank you, Mr. Drew. So I used a piece of paper for this, and it does, this is a tool now. And I'm not gonna write anything on this paper, but I'm gonna use it to get this angle and then determine what the miter angle is for that in between, so that I could cut my tubing to make it work. So let me show you how I do this real simple. And you could use anything for this that's big enough. So what we do is we lay down our paper along the line, and then we fold it along our other line. It's very simple. I know lots of paper folding tricks that I use, and I'll teach you as we go along here. So this is the angle for that top piece of our roll bar right here. And if I want to figure out what half that angle is to be able to cut it, I just fold these two together like this. And this is now what the end of the tubing needs to look like. So I could take this over to the saw and set it up and have this angle put right in the saw. So let's go ahead and do that. Then we know that when we put a piece of tubing in there to make the cut, that it's gonna make that miter cut exactly where it needs to be in order to make this headache rack a possibility. All right, so here we are. And what I'm gonna do is set this saw up using this to set our guide. So I'm gonna pull this back out of the way so it's not in my way as I do this, and then I'm gonna loosen this up so that's free to move. And basically I'm just gonna lay this in here like that along the blade edge. I'm gonna turn this edge until they match. Pull it down to check it. Make sure it's straight. And there it is right there. This is the cutting angle I have to make this work. Now you can solidify this by using something more rigid like cardboard. You could have a template that's made out of metal. It works really well. You could build a set of guides if you want to and hang them on the wall. A lot of people do different things for making their setups happen over and over and over again. But what I'll tell you is this is super fast, super easy, and you can do it any place. If you're out in the field and you have something that's broken and you're taking parts back and forth as you manufacture them, or you're manufacturing something to fit for somebody that's already somewhere, it is invaluable to copy things off on paper to find out what you need, and then you can write little notes on them and stuff, take them with you. You can draw the orientation in or whatever. I've been doing this for a long time, and I use this trick all of the time. Another thing that's really cool is if you're trying to do different types of quarter joints, you can use the same format to do it, and we use this for even for cutting welding certs and stuff and grinding them and checking them. It's a pretty popular way of doing it. So I'm going to show you how to do split an angle into multiple pieces. It's pretty easy and it's really decorative, and you can use this if you're doing trim work at home or other things like that. Okay, so a lot of times when we cut something like that, we want to go around something. So we're going to do basically the same thing with this, but it's going to be a little bit different. So I'm going to draw it out first. What we're going to do is we're going to use this to symbolize a piece of material, or to step in for a piece of material. Here's one, like that. Pretty simple. Let's say we have another piece and it's coming in this angle right here, like this. Pretty simple. The miter angle is literally this spot to that spot. So if you have a way to draw that in, you can use a protractor to set that angle. What if we want to get fancy with it and break it into multiple pieces? Well, that can be done too. So let me move you over and I'll show you how to, I'm gonna do a 45 on an angle, but I'm gonna do a 45 on the outside. So the miter joints are actually gonna change what their angle is. So I'm gonna do this time. Line. Line. And what I want to do is cut this so that it's actually 3 pieces. So it's not a sharp corner. It's like a straight across corner like that. So how do we do that? It's actually pretty simple. What we do is we copy this out and you divide the angle in 2, right? That would be your 45. Pretty straightforward. Right? You've already seen this, but we use tools. This time, this is our tool. All right, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna try to figure out a way to do this and get 45s in there, but these aren't 45 joints to make everything match. It doesn't work. So what you gotta do is figure out how to make this sort of angle here. How do you do that? Well, actually, it's not really that bad. There's a lot of ways to do it, but here's one that works pretty well. So you can change this angle to whichever one you want in real life, like this, by laying it along the edge. Once you have it, then you just need to do a folding sequence in order to make all of these things match together to give you your actual lines. They're like miniature versions of the big one that we did. So I'm just gonna go like this. It's like I'm making paper airplanes. All right, there's one. And if this one was a different angle, we would fold this one over this way to make the second angle, and we'd have both of them copied. But all I have to do is take this little angle right here, over to my saw, put it in there, and it will cut this side like it needs to be. And then we take the other piece, put it in, cut that side like it needs to be. If this one's different, then we just have to lay it back down, copy this side off. So that's how you can get to these two things can be different angles. Just like this one over here, you can do them all at one time. So if you're doing trim work or something, you're going around a square corner and you want an edge on there, around, then you just got to divide that angle one more time. So I use the paper, it's super handy. If you didn't understand all that, don't worry about it. Come back to this video when the time comes and you're gonna figure it out. And I'm always here to help you if you're working on it. But the paper is a super cheap tool for doing a great job.